Yeah, I thought we'd have a look at this situation that's going on, if you want to, because there's just so much on the news still, isn't there, about it, and it's probably not all over yet. What I'm going to try and hopefully show you is that all of these things are directly prophesied about and are all events that are leading up to the return of Christ. So that's really what we're going to do, and I'm going to get you doing some bits and pieces when we go through this. But I thought what we just do just for a minute is just have a look at some of the background to this crisis and sort of really how it's come about. That there is a map of Crimea, which looks a little bit like an island, doesn't it? It almost is an island, but it isn't quite, because it is actually joined to Ukraine. Interestingly, it isn't joined to Russia. So there's a gap here, as you can see. And Russia now is planning on building a bridge between the two. So it's now, we are sort of connected. But anyway, I thought we'd just have a look and see how this all came about, and then have a look at the scriptures to see, what's the Bible sort of saying we should be looking for. So the first thing I thought I'd just show you is this, and this is, I think, quite interesting because it sort of shows why, Russia has done what it's done. Now, some of you will remember the good old USSR, won't you? Because, well, probably a lot of us in here remember when it was the USSR, because it was the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, from 1922 all the way through to 1991. And the map of the USSR, in fact, really, it was an empire. It was like an empire. So you got the United States of America over here, and you've got the USSR over here, and they were the two superpowers that were opposing each other. And what was the mindset? What was their philosophy over on this side? Communism. And on the other side, the US of A was what? Capitalism. So you got capitalism versus communism. That's what it was all about. And then in 1991, the whole USSR broke up. And it ended up looking still fairly chunky landmass, isn't it, Russia? If I go again, so you see where some of their territory disappeared. But this green landmass now is just Russia. And all the satellite states round the edge of it, they lost at that point. So if we were sat here in 1990, for instance, Ukraine was part of the USSR. And so were all these other nations, some of which you might have heard of, some of which you don't hear of very often. So Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and some I can't even pronounce. And all of those were separate but part of the big thing. They were all run by the government in Moscow. Everybody was, linked in together. So how the collapse of the USSR came about, I'm not really going to go into that, but let's just assume, well, not assume, it did. It came to an end and Russia contracted. Happy with that? Okay, now here's another picture. This is tracking Europe. So on the one hand, we've got Russia that has contracted, lost lots of its satellites. In 1957, it wasn't called the European Union at that point, but let's call it the European Union. That was the beginnings of the European Union, and those were the nations that were part of it. In 1973, we became part of it. Some of you will remember all of that. And was that when decimalisation and stuff came in?
The common market.
The common market, of course, back then. 1981, Greece came in. 1986, you've got Spain and Portugal. 1990, it continues to grow. 1995, what's that, Norway. 2007, you see how this is growing eastwards. 2013, so that's where we are right now. So on the east, you've got Russia that's contracted, and on the west, you've got Europe expanding. Now you notice what's interesting here is that it stopped at this point in 2013, but the very next steps are which countries? Which is this country? What's this huge country here?
Ukraine.
There's the Ukraine.
Oh.
All right? So Europe has pushed further and further and further west, and suddenly it's smack up against the very countries that Russia lost. One of which is Ukraine. Another one is Moldova. And these are these countries around the edge here. Now, what's Russia thinking about this? Not a great deal. Because how it views these nations here, it sees them as its sort of offspring. It sees them as its own. Even though they've become separate countries, it still sees them very much in that type of in that light. And even more so since Putin came to power. And I'll show you some quotes and what's in his mind as we go through here. And so what sort of happened with the Ukraine is that the Ukraine has become a very, very polarised, divided country. So on the east, you can literally pretty much draw a line down the centre of Ukraine like they've done on that map. So on the east of Ukraine, they are very who? Pro who?
Europe.
No?
The other way.
Russia. So on the east, obviously closest to Russia, they're very pro-Russia. And they speak Russian, and they like the Russians. They are sort of Russians, that's how they view themselves. And on the west, they're very pro-Europe. And they don't speak Russian, they speak Ukrainian. And so consequently, there is this division. Well, in a democracy, that causes a problem, doesn't it? Because you've got people voting, and of course, sometimes it's swung towards Europe, sometimes it's swung towards Russia. Russia then try and give lots of cash and incentives for them to stay on board over here, and meanwhile, Europe's chatting them up and saying, hey, look at what we could offer you, we could give you all this stuff. So there's this behind the scenes, and I'll show you some interesting stuff that's happened over the last few years. I've gone back into the Weekly World Watch to pull out Ukraine slides, and the stuff that happened that I'd completely forgotten about, but sort of reported on at the time. If we're looking, this was no surprise. They're wrenching this country one way and the other. So just a little bit of very, very recent history of what's happened with the Crimea especially. So Crimea is part of Ukraine. Okay, so even though it's called Crimea, it'd be a bit like us saying, there's Scotland, but there's the United Kingdom. All right, so it's definitely part, or was, until just a few weeks ago, part of Ukraine. So here's some of the stuff, and you might recognise some of these events because you will have seen them. It was headline news when it was happening. So on the 21st of November, the president, a pro-Russian president who had been chatted up by Europe, rejected an EU deal to do a massive trade deal, in effect, with Europe and to go closer to Europe. And the reason he did that is because Russia said, well, wait, forget about that Europe deal, stay with us and we'll give you tons and tons of benefits and cash and reduce gas prices. And he says, yeah, that actually is pretty good, and let's go with that. In December, do you remember this? It was on the news pretty much every night about the pro-EU people in Independence Square. And they're going crazy. They're going absolutely crazy because their president has rejected Europe. So everybody that was pro-Europe goes mental. And they don't give up. They stay there. And whatever the police, whatever the forces try and do, they're they just don't give up. And we saw, do you remember all I could have put video up of the violence, but it's horrible. I mean, literally tearing the place apart, rocks everywhere, missiles everywhere, not very pleasant at all. And so it went on until it reached a climax. when this guy here, President Yanukovych, basically, in his last throw of the dice to sort this out, sent in snipers to take people out. Because there's one way of clearing a square. He's tried water cannon, tried gas, tried everything. Now I'm just going to kill them. And he shot dead about 88 people. And some of the protesters killed soldiers and the like. But it was a massacre in that square. But they still didn't go. Now what does he do? Or what did he do? He didn't walk, he ran. But he did walk away. He literally scarpered. He left everything. He jumped on a helicopter. There's video of him literally running into his helicopter and taking off. And where do you think he went?
Russia.
He went to his friends in Russia and resurfaced there a few weeks later. There it is. Mr. Yanukovych flees on the 22nd of February. Now, of course, the pro-Russian Prime Minister's gone, and Parliament now calls an election. So you can imagine Europe, obviously, and I'm including probably America in this, thinking, well, this is great. We've got rid of that pro-Russian guy. Not much Russia can do about this. The democracy has won. The people on the streets have overcome. We're going to get a pro-Western guy in. Ukraine's going to come on side with us now, once and for all. We have won Ukraine. Well, that was until Russia said, you ain't doing that. And overnight, do you remember this, 27th of Feb, suddenly Russian gunmen appear in Crimea. And they're going around with Russian flags. And apparently, they didn't have the Russian insignia, like the military always wear an insignia. And it was taken off all of them. So when they went in, nobody could actually tell who. It was Russian uniform, but without the insignia. Russian, sort of vehicles that they were turning up in with Russian number plates, but because they got no insignia. So when they went in to key buildings in the Crimea, people were saying, who are you? Who are you? And they would say, we are Russia. So we are Russia. So they would say that, but there was no insignia. So suddenly key buildings were being taken over. Remarkably, they managed to do it without a shot being fired. It's amazing, really. I mean, Crimea is a heavily militarised zone. This isn't like, walking into Wales and there's a few sheep in your way. This is military zone. Russia itself, and the reason it really likes Crimea is because of what? What's it got in Crimea? Sevastopol. Sevastopol is their port here in Crimea, which of course they lost when Ukraine left the USSR, yeah? So what they did was said, we'll give you Crimea back then, but we've got to keep our military port, Sevastopol, going. And Russia leases that, or has done until just now, off Crimea. And it's a huge port. They've got 20,000 troops there, all of their ships. Why do you think they want this port in the Black Sea? Why do you want a load of ships in the Black Sea?
It's our ice stream.
It gives access straight into the way God has designed. None of it's coincidence. The fact that Crimea is a little blob on the end is not a coincidence. The fact that there's a very small channel out the Black Sea into the Med is not a coincidence. If that had been sealed up, and it could have been quite easily, it would have been a huge sea as a lake. It wouldn't have meant anything. But that was the access through to the Mediterranean. Then on the 6th of March, Crimea's parliament votes to join Russia. And then Crimea voters, do you remember Russia said we're going to have a referendum in Crimea? 90-odd% said, yeah, we want to join Russia. And the deal was done. And finally, Vladimir Putin signed a document, which I'll show you in a minute, that brought Crimea into Russia. And that was on the 21st of March. Russia formalises the takeover. So I'm just going to play this video clip. Hopefully it all works. it's just interesting to see in this video clip. It's a BBC News video clip, and it compares what's happened in Europe to what's happening in Russia.
A day of signings, two worlds, East versus West, different leaders with different pens. In Moscow, President Putin sealed the absorption of Crimea into Russia by signing the legal documents. A Russian anthem played. The president saluted what he called a serious, momentous event. 1,400 miles away in Brussels, a very different signing. The EU took the symbolic first step of signing a political agreement with Ukraine, bringing the nation of 46 million people closer to the heart of Europe. No anthem here, just a ripple of applause. At a summit in Brussels, Europe's leaders adopted new sanctions against 12 Russian officials, including the Russian Deputy Prime Minister, after the referendum in Crimea, which led to the region breaking away.
Since we last met, a sham and illegal referendum has taken place at the barrel of a Kalashnikov, and Russia has sought to annex Crimea. This is a flagrant breach of international law and something we will not recognize.
Страна в мире, которая реально способна превратить США в радиоактивный пепел.
Amongst the new people targeted today is Dmitry Kiselyov, head of the Russia Today news agency and a cheerleader for President Putin,
На следующий день буквально
and a man who recently said that Russia was the one country that could turn America into nuclear ash. So, after this summit here, 33 Crimeans and Russians now face travel restrictions and a freeze on their assets. Most significantly, the summit agreed here that if the crisis escalates, then they are prepared to move to some form of economic sanctions, and the Commission has been tasked with exploring potential targets. But how much impact would any of this have on Russia? Well, the stock market is down 20% since the crisis began. Two ratings agencies have downgraded Russia, and its finance minister has warned economic sanctions would raise Russia's borrowing costs. Back in the corridors in Brussels, the atmosphere was spiced with warnings about Russian intentions. This was the Ukrainian Prime Minister.
What's happening in the world today? What's up? Russia decided to actually impose a new post-Cold War order and to revise the results of the Second World War? This is the truth.
For the moment, President Putin is undeterred, but the economy is vulnerable and Europe's leaders are determined to reduce their dependency on Russian energy. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
Anyway, so there we go. You see how they're comparing the two things. It's amazing, isn't it? You see this friction between the two. Now, what a lot of people have been quoting is this. They're trying to explain why Putin has done what he's done. And interestingly, I went back, so I remembered quoting this in the World Watch all this time ago. So this is on the 29th of October, 2004. So this is 10 years ago. I go back and I find this slide. Putin has an eye on the future as he looks back on Soviet glory victory. And basically, here was Putin 10 years ago, and this is what the Daily Telegraph said at that time. In scenes eerily reminiscent of the Cold War, President Vladimir Putin joined President Leonid Kuchma of Ukraine to watch a military parade goose-step through Kiev yesterday. So at this point in Ukraine's history, in 2004, very pro-Russian guy was there, and there's Putin, and all these troops are goose-stepping past them, and Putin is looking at this thinking this is great. Ukraine's definitely in our fold. I'm here, they're goose-stepping in front of me, this is great. And then, I don't even remember this is on the 13th of December 2004, because it went from a pro-Russian guy to this guy. And this guy, Mr. Viktor Yushchenko, was pro-Europe. And during his campaign, that is what Russia did to him. They used a very, very specialised type of poison. What it said in the Daily Telegraph was Mr. Yushchenko was victim of a Cold War style poisoning by members of the country's intelligence services. Since then, all fingers have pointed to Russian FSB, which is their secret service. They actually tried to kill him, but they did it in a way that wasn't just shooting, but was using a particular poison that would point to the fact it was Russia behind it, because they wanted everybody to know, look, this is us. We are going in and doing this. This guy's still alive, but you can see what they did to him. These are the lengths that Russia will go to. Now, here's another headline that I found back in 2005, and again, this has been quoted a lot in the press recently. This was Daily Telegraph, April the 26th, 2005. This is Vladimir Putin, who is describing the breakup of the Soviet Union, the USSR, as the greatest geopolitical disaster of the last century. Have you heard them say that on the news recently? They've kept quoting it because they said, look, this is what was in his mind. All along, he's told us that he's got a problem with losing all these countries, and as Europe has crept up, he said, enough is enough. So the question is, what does he do next? Well, here is the BBC about 24 hours ago.
A few months ago, a Russian official told me that Russia and the West were locked in a game of geopolitical chess, a battle for influence over Ukraine. A zero-sum game, he called it, where both sides were determined to emerge the victor. Now, the pro-EU revolution in Kiev that appeared to be disaster for Moscow and checkmate. But not quite, because what happened next was that Russia annexed the Crimea, and in a stroke, the Kremlin changed the rules of the game. And the result of that is a huge change on the ground. The scale of confrontation now between East and West is greater than at any time since the Cold War. The rhetoric is louder, the stakes are even higher. The big question now is, what will Vladimir Putin's next move be? Will he order Russian troops into southern and eastern Ukraine on the pretext of protecting Russian speakers there? Only he knows the answer to that, but there are things we do know. For example, we know that protecting compatriots abroad is one of the Kremlin's priorities now. President Putin has said so himself. We know too that the Russian media has been working overtime in recent days, accusing Ukraine of violating the rights of Russian speakers. Kiev denies it. We know that the Kremlin feels cheated by the West, threatened by NATO, and determined to defend what it sees as its sphere of influence in the region. And Russia doesn't really believe that the West will go to war over Ukraine. And that means that the possibility of future Russian intervention, military intervention, remains very real, and so does the risk of increasing tension between East and West.
Sums it up, don't you think? So this was Weekly World Watch yesterday. Russia's building up its troops, 40,000 of them, all along the Ukrainian border. They then say, in the afternoon yesterday, but don't worry, we're not going to go in, we're not going to do anything, you can be, it's all peaceful intentions. But ultimately, the tension is still there, and something could quite easily happen. So, there's the background, longer than I wanted to cover it, but basically now what I thought we'd do is have a look at some of the scriptures and focus in on what the Bible says we should be looking at. So with Bible in hand, we can work a lot of this stuff out. So, you've seen this slide before possibly, so what I've done here is got Ezekiel 38 and Daniel chapter 11 on the screen. And these are two passages that are linked together and tell us about a Russian invasion of the Middle East. And there's a particular man who heads up that invasion. And his name, in scriptural terms, is who?
Gog.
Gog. So, just to show you that these two passages are sort of lined up. So basically in Daniel chapter 11 it says at the time of the end there's a king of the north that comes down like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and many ships. He's going to enter into the countries and overflow and pass over. He's going to enter into the glorious land. Many countries will be overthrown. There's some that's going to escape out of his hand, like Jordan, because that's what that's saying there. He will also stretch forth his hand upon other countries. The land of Egypt will not escape. And then he's going to get power over the treasures and gold and the precious things of Egypt. And he's got Libyans and Ethiopians with him at the same time. Over in Ezekiel 38, it's the parallel passage to Daniel 11. So if you notice where the colours line up, we've got Son of Man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you back, put hooks in your jaws, bring you forth. And here's what he comes down with, horses and horsemen and many chariots. Persia, Ethiopia and Libya are going to be with you. You're going to come from the north quarters, and it's going to happen in the latter years. And you're going to come against the mountains of Israel. So there's this great big force that comes down. And when you link all the bits together in colour there, hopefully you're doing that with your eyes, you can see that these passages are the same event, would you say? Looks undisputably the same event. What Daniel 11 doesn't tell us is who the king of the north is. It doesn't say the king of the north from anywhere. But Ezekiel 38 does. So like with a jigsaw puzzle, we're putting the pieces together. This bit now explains who this person is. And of course, we even know the name of him. We've got Gog of the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So he's of the land of Magog, and he rules over places called Meshech and Tubal. So to just decode that, what we have to do is go and look at some ancient history books to see, well, where was Magog originally? Because that's the first name on the list. Gog of the land of Magog. So we go and look at this fella here. Now this is Josephus. He was an ancient historian, lived around about the time of Christ. He writes in his book, Magog founded those that from him were named the Magogites, but who by the Greeks are called the Scythians. So Magog equals the Scythians. And the reason I try and make that link is because there are many maps showing where the Scythians lived. There aren't many maps showing where the Magogites lived, because the Magogites were more ancient than the Scythians. Are you with me? So here is a map showing you where the Scythians were. So there's the Scythians. Look up here. Here's the Black Sea. But can you see where they are? This light greeny blob is pretty much all southern Russia. Pretty much all southern Russia. Apart from, let me show you a slightly different map. So this orange blob here is Scythia. There's the Black Sea that we were just looking at. There's Crimea, look. That little blob down here, that is Crimea. And you see where Scythia went? Right across there. But I've superimposed onto that map where Ukraine is. And there is Ukraine. So if I use this, it might be easier. Ukraine's border, if you can just about make it out, goes all around there. See that? And notice that Scythia went straight through the centre of Ukraine. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? That's exactly the bit that is pro-Russia right now. Exactly. You couldn't draw it any more accurately. It's exactly the bit that the West is saying we're frightened that Putin could come in and take that bit because they're all Russian-speaking, pro-Russian mainly. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? So it says Gog of... Does anybody know what Magog means?
You didn't tell us.
It means the land of Gog. So when it says Gog of the land of Magog, it's really saying Gog of the land of Gog. So in other words, Gog controls... Magog means the land of Gog, and he is making it right now his. Exactly as the Bible said. He's already got this bit, hasn't he? He's already got great chunks of this bit, but he hasn't got this little bit over here, and he's making that his own. Now, Gog isn't some hypothetical, airy-fairy thing. Gog is and was a real and historical person. And there was a person, an historian in the 1800s called Ragozin, and she was a she, and she wrote this book called The Empire of the Tsars. And in her book, she writes about Gog, and she says Gog was king of Magog, was originally a real and historical person, none other in fact than the chief of the Scythians, probably a warrior sufficiently renowned to have survived as a byword for terror in later generations, and that is an ancient sort of statue of ancient Gog. He was a real person. So when God says, "I'm against you, O Gog," we're looking for a real person, not some hypothetical sort of thing. And he controls the area. What were the three areas he controls? Yeah, well, Tubal equals Tobolsk, Meshech equals the area of Moscow, and the last one which we just talked about was? Magog. Yeah. So you've got Magog. So you've got Magog, Meshech and Tubal. All of that covers the territory of modern Russia. And what does this guy do? Have a look at Ezekiel 38. What have we already said that he's going to do? What does Gog actually do in simple terms? What's he going to do? It tells you in verse 4.
Turn you around, so he's going to go.
So he's going to come forth with all his army. So there's something to do with I'm going to turn you back. But then the action is you're coming forth with all your army. Question is, what sort of army has this Russian leader got? Well, he's got quite a chunky army. He's got a very chunky army. This is the number of nuclear warheads that Russia has got versus America. The blue is America, the red is Russia. Now they've both reduced, but look where we are here. They're a fearsome, fearsome army. They're spending, now that ended in 2007, this particular map, so they were spending more back in the 90s, and you see how it had dropped off and then it's picked up again. And I checked yesterday to see what their spending was for last year, and it was 78 billion. So that's 35 billion, so if we put it on the map now, it'd be double that. Their spending has rocketed up in terms of military expenditure. They've got 1.1 million troops. They've got 5,614 nuclear warheads. The size of today's Russian military approximates that of American forces, which have global responsibilities and conduct operations at a far higher intensity. Russia created a mechanism for rapidly mobilizing millions of men in a short time and putting them into ready-made contact divisions. That's Jane's Defence Weekly. They report on military stuff, right? And what we've just seen, pretty much for the first time, is Russia doing exactly that. Units set up, and a moment's notice, they just go in and take over a place. And where are they going to come down to, does it say? In here, what does it call it? Where are they going to come down to? It says in verse 8 where they're going to come down to.
Israel.
Yeah, and what specifically does it say?
The mountains of Israel.
The mountains of Israel. They are mountains in Israel. And actually, can you see this map here? Can you see the mountains? This is Israel. dark green blob, I don't know if you can see that red dotted line, that's the eastern border of Israel. And that green bit is flat there, but can you see going like a ridge right down the middle of mountains?
Yeah.
Those are the mountains of Israel. It's right into the heart, centre of Israel. That's where he's going to come. So Russia is going to come down. Now this is quite amazing because this is what Paul Billington produced. He's the editor of the Bible magazine. And I got this in 1998, and I kept it, and that was the front page that was the front cover of the Bible magazine there, and there's the bear, and here's all these satellite states, and he was basically showing you pretty much what I'm talking about now. And then where are we? On Friday, I'm in London, and I've been in meetings all day, and I come out, and I'm at Paddington Station. And I think I'll just go into, I never go into a newsagent, and I just thought I'll just walk into a newsagent. I didn't even have any spare change, I just literally walking in there. And I stood there, and right in front of me was this. And I was just staring at this thing, and the image was identical to what I remembered back in 1998 on the front thing. And there's Russia, with all the arrows coming down. And look who's down here, but America and Britain. They've stuck Germany in there, but there's America and Britain down the south. And it's precisely the same as many, many Christadelphian slides on that particular subject of Russia versus America and Britain. And there it was. So I couldn't buy it, didn't have any cash on me, so I got back and got it off the internet. And there it is. So, Putin came... What year did Putin come to power, do you remember? Originally? 2000. And I remember scanning this in out of the Telegraph back then. And there it is, look. So this is going all the way back to the year 2000. And even then they said, return of the KGB, Putin is branded a modern Stalin, will Russia return to its Cold War terror? Putin poised to turn Russia into KGB PLC. I remember scanning all these things back in then. That's 2000. That's 14 years ago.
Yeah.
But then what happened? He was in power for how long?
4 years.
8 years. 8 years he was in power because technically that's as long as he could be. And then what did he do?
Changed the rules.
He put Medvedev in for 4 years, changed the rules that said I can now serve for another 2 6-year terms, so another 12 years. Pretty much managed Medvedev behind the scenes. He was always there. 2 heads, 1 power is the Kremlin slogan, and basically he continued to run the country. Medvedev is gone, he's a nobody really now, he's the Prime Minister with no power. And basically we got Putin back in again. Now what is really interesting about this is that if you have a look in Ezekiel 38, and in verse, which we've already just quoted, in verse 4, talking to Gog, who's the Russian leader, it says, I will turn you back and then put hooks in your jaws and bring you forth. And you think, well, how is a man turned back? Because it's specifically talking to Gog. And the answer is that this isn't a fantastic translation. If you look at all the other times that this word is translated, it literally says, I will return you, or I will restore you. So in the original Hebrew, it's far, far better translated saying, Gog, I will return you, or Gog, I will restore you. And when he's been restored, what then does he do? Down he comes. And therefore, the restoration of him to power as president, I think, is a massive sign, because when did he come back into power? 12. It would be 2012, wasn't it? So 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, and now suddenly what we're seeing is starting to break forth out of the out of his territory, out of his shell. Absolutely incredible. So we come back and look at this. So we can see this starting to happen over here. Magog is coming together. Putin's been restored to power. Everything is ready to start happening. Everything is ready to start happening. And this is what it's going to look like, okay? Because over in Daniel 11, it says the king of the north is going to come down like a whirlwind. So in simple terms, there is Russia up here with all its missiles. There's a bit of a barrier here at the minute because this is Georgia, which it's got to get through. This is the land barrier. Here's the Black Sea. There's Crimea. And this bit of sea comes all the way through and he can get round to here, down to Israel. So he's going to send his troops down through here and he's going to send the ships round here. We know this because it says, King of the North will come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and many ships. So the fact that they now have Sevastopol, I can never remember the name, then round he will come with his ships. He will overflow and pass over. He will enter into the glorious land, which is Israel. But here's the end of Gog. He's going to succeed. He's going to look like, wow, look what he's done. Crimea will just like a tiny little test run. This is going to be immense when he does this. He'll pitch his palatial tents between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, which is Zion. Yet he will come to his end and none will help him. He's going to come to the most cataclysmic end of anybody that we've ever seen. It's going to be the most unbelievable end of this man, because it won't be mankind that gets rid of him. It'll be God. And so we have, in Daniel 11, this whole thing about the king of the north versus the king of the south. The whole of Daniel 11 is about the king of the north versus the king of the south. And we know that the king of the north is Russia. Go back and have a look at Daniel chapter 8. Have a look at those verses that we were just talking about. You see, what Daniel chapter 8 is about, because of time, I've gone on too long. You're going to have to take my word for some stuff I'm about to tell you. Basically, Daniel chapter 11, the king of the north versus king of the south, is about the Seleucid Empire versus the Ptolemaic Empire. That's what Daniel 11 is all about, but we found out that at the time of the end, it's moved up to Russia. The king of the north is no longer the Seleucid Empire, it's now the Russian Empire up here. And Daniel chapter 8 is all about how this works out. Daniel chapter 8 is about the Seleucid king of the north and this guy, Gog, who runs up here. Okay? That's what Daniel chapter 8 is actually all about. And if I had more than another 20 minutes, I could prove it to you. But just for the time being, have a little look at this verse 23 in Daniel chapter 8. It says, in the latter time of their kingdom, when transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. This is talking about a latter day guy. How do we know it's a latter day guy? In the latter times. There's some key phrases, okay? So in verse 17, a different version says, understand that the vision concerns events at the time of the end. So that's verse 17, look. The vision concerns the time of the end. Can you see that phrase?
Yeah.
In verse 19, it says, what you have seen pertains to the very time of the end. And in verse 26, it concerns the distant future. So this prophecy, which is pretty much about the ancient king of the north, it's actually, the prophecy is saying it isn't just about this ancient king of the north, it's about events at the time of the end. It's about events at the time of the end. It's about the distant future. And so verse 23 through to verse 25 describes the man that exists at the very end of time. Look through those verses and try and get a picture in your mind as to who this final king of the north looks like and what sort of character is he. So maybe we won't do it as discussion. Well, we do it as discussion. You just call out to me stuff that you think, yeah, that's describing this man. What's he like?
Aggressive.
So he's an aggressive man. He's got a fierce countenance. So even his face looks fierce. Yeah? He's going to prosper and thrive. So whatever he's done, he's been successful in what he's doing. Yeah, he understands sinister schemes. Where does that... Is that in verse 25?
Verse 23.
Verse 23.
Dark sentences.
Oh, yeah, ours
I'm
says...
on the New King James.
So he's got some sinister schemes. AV says dark sentences. He's yeah.
It doesn't make mention that it's power of his own.
So he's become powerful, but not through his own power. So in other words, he's become powerful, but it isn't his own power that's got him there. And we'll talk about that if we get a chance.
It says through his cunning.
Sorry, Beck? So he's got quite an arrogant frame of mind. He's somebody that thinks he's great, would you say?
Yeah. This says through his cunning, his heart.
Ah. Now, you know in the AV it says, through his policy he will cause craft to prosper. Janet's version has changed the word craft to deceit. And that's what the original word really means. So this is a deceitful man.
It says through his cunning.
He's cunning, he's crafty, he's deceitful, he's puffed up, he's proud, he's very successful. He's a fierce man. Right, I think we've got quite a few of these. So here is my list. He's a fierce king. He's got a bold countenance, it says. He's a master of intrigue, one of the versions says. He becomes very strong. He's a very powerful man. He causes shocking destruction, one version says. Astounding devastation, I think it says in the AV. He's successful in all that he does. Whatever he seems to do seems to just somehow work. We also read that he attacks the holy people. Where does it say that? Verse 24, yeah. He destroys the holy people. He's a master of deception. It's all about deceit. And he's a very arrogant, proud man. And he destroys without warning. Now, I don't know where I got that from. I might put that on the slide. Now, the original guy, does anybody know the name of the original king of the north? The the original one. You got him? There he is. So he was the original king of the north that really Daniel 8 is all about. But as we've already looked at, there's a time of the end, there's a time of the end, there's a distant future one of these. So even though Antiochus was the original bad boy, there's another one at the end. We know he's definitely the very end, because who does he stand against?
Prince of princes.
And who might that be?
Jesus.
Jesus. So this man even stands up against the Lord Jesus Christ. So it can't be the original guy. It's got to be, as was originally said, something at the time of the end. So we're looking for a man who fulfills all of this, but he's also got to be part of the territory of the King of the North. And we know that the King of the North is Russian. So not only do we need a list of somebody that does all of that, we also need somebody that is going to be a Russian ruler. And I believe there doesn't seem to be a lot of doubt in it now that this man, Vladimir Putin, fits this description. He even looks a bit similar to ancient Antiochus Epiphanes. There's some similarity there in the way they even look. What are we looking for? King of fierce countenance. He is strong and successful. He's a puffed up man. Whatever he does seems to work out. Just watch him here. This is a couple of days ago.
Good morning, dear members of the Federation Council, members of the State Duma, representatives of the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. that are among here citizens of Russia, residents of Crimea and Sevastopol. Thank you.
Уважаемые друзья, сегодня мы собрались по вопросу,
Dear friends,
который
today
имеет
we are
жизненно
here
важное значение,
about the issue
историческое
that
значение
has
для всех нас.
vitally important significance, historic significance for all of us. On the 17th of March, in the Crimea, there was a referendum in full correspondence with democratic procedures and international legal norms. More than 82% of the voters took part in the referendum. More than 96% spoke for reunification with Russia. These figures are more than convincing.
There you go. Arrogant, puffed up, proud. You know, you don't. Our leaders go around on Boris bikes around London. Not this guy. He's done his own calendar, so you can get your own Putin calendar. He's also got his own shock forces, as they're called, young militants called the Narshis, of all names, the Narshis, who actually follow this guy, follow Putin. They're given these T-shirts, and on these T-shirts is his face. And I didn't know what it meant, those Russian letters down there, so I looked it up and it means our choice. So there's Putin's face, our choice. If this isn't arrogance and puffed up, it's incredible. It's a cult. Is he a man that's caused shocking destruction? This was the New Statesman from a few years ago, Putin's reign of terror. He has brought unbelievable destruction to Chechen terrorists. I'm not saying Chechens are good, but when he goes in, there's absolute, complete and utter destruction. Do you remember the Beslan school massacre, where all those children got killed because he just said, oh, I don't care, I'm just going in to take out the terrorists? Hundreds of children were killed in that. He's a shocking, shocking man to deal with. Master of deception. This is taken from the US State Department just from a couple of days ago, reference what we've seen going on in Crimea. And look what it says. President Putin's fiction, 10 false claims about Ukraine. This is the State Department. This isn't some hocus pocus website. They are listing out all the deception of Putin. So he says our Russian troops aren't in Crimea. They're saying, well, they are. They're driving around in Russian vehicles. Just because you've taken the badge off doesn't mean they're not Russian forces. It's all deception and it is all lies. And he's a master of that. And finally, this was in the Daily Telegraph a few years ago, and each one of these depicts Putin. And it's because he was doing some crazy stuff a few years ago. So he's a judo expert, there he is like Rambo, there he is controlling the gas, there he is working with religious leaders in Russia saying, I'm actually a peaceful guy. And every single one of those cartoon pictures lines up with Daniel chapter 8. So you've got a stern-faced king, a master of intrigue, or a fierce king. He will consider himself superior, so he's arrogant. He'll become very strong, but not by his own power. He was put in power by Boris Yeltsin. He was just lifted out of obscurity and put into power. And all his power comes from the oligarchs and the cash that comes from the gas. And finally, it says he causes deceit to prosper. He tries to sound like righteous and holy and peaceful, but actually he's completely the opposite. I haven't got time to tell you about this, but it basically says in Ezekiel 38 that Gog is going to think an evil thought, and that word in the original means plan. He's going to develop an evil plan. And just a couple of years ago, round Russia, This was the headline in the Daily Telegraph. Vladimir Putin's unknown plan. Across almost every town and city in the world's largest country, large banners slung across boulevards, draped down the side of apartment blocks, proclaim a solemn promise to the voters. Putin's plan is Russia's victory. And the plan, it says, what the plan is, almost nobody knows. And the plan is, I can tell you what the plan is, because God tells us what the plan is, and that is to enlarge again the US, Russia, and become a superpower and invade and take over. And the plan is now underway. And so therefore, he is going to come down. It is going to happen. And, well, we might not be too long away from seeing it come about.